Hello and welcome back to the Jewelry Box Build. This video is going to be about making the dividers in the trays. I have the divider stock sanded, varnished. The top edge has been rounded over on the router table and everything's in long lengths. So the first step is to go to the table saw and cut things to length. Instead of using the crosscut sled, I set up this fence with two miter gauges because it's lighter. We're going to be doing a lot of cutting, and using the sled just gets very cumbersome. So I have set the stop block. We're cutting the long pieces first that go side to side in the tray. So I'm going to cut it and then test fit it to the tray. Just a little bit tight. I am going to cut all the side-to-side dividers in one setting. I'm not going to show all that on camera. I'll be back when I cut the front-to-back pieces. So I have all of the divider stock for the different boxes cut and fitted to these two trays. And now I'll set up to cut the front-to-back pieces. That's pretty good. So now I'm going to cut all of those off camera and I'll check back in and get set up for cutting the notches. So here are all the divider parts cut to length. Everything is the same height, or the width if you measure the pieces. Everything is the right length. Everything has been varnished and polished. If it goes past this stage without being varnished, sanded, and polished, it gets really frustrating later because the sandpaper or the rags catch on the notches and the pieces can crack. So the one thing that I've learned is that it's really good to have everything organized and to have everything polished. The next step is to start cutting the notches in the parts so that they fit together. And I'm going to go through that, show you how it's done, but then explain it later. And I might do a quick sketch just to give you some idea of the interlocking nature of the alignment of the notches so that it all holds together. In an attempt to try to explain the layout of the notches, we have the long dividers that go side to side, we have the short dividers that go front to back on the ends. And we have the other short dividers that go front to back in the middle of the tray. The front to back get notched on the bottom. The front to back in the middle get notched on the top. The long ones get notched where the top is cut away on the ends, but in the middle, the notches are on the bottom. You have to space those accurately and also get the height so that they fit together like a half flap. A real critical issue is that there's often varnish or glue or a little bit of fuzz in the corners of the trays. So the notches on the ends are about a 64th more than the thickness. The thickness is about 1/8 of an inch, about 4 millimeters. So we want the end cuts to happen first because they're going to be a little bit more. We'll use the shoulder to shoulder dimensions to evenly divide the other notches. It's something that it's hard to explain, but once I have them cut, you'll see how they go together. I wanted to try to explain the complexity of it and not just show you the finished pieces with all these different notches that look like they just fit together, but you need to think it through ahead of time first. So I will cut the end notches on all of these, and then I'll show laying out the intermediate notches with the dividers. You can see I've set up the stop block so that it's just a 64th past the inside edge of the saw. So that when I cut this, instead of an 1/8 inch, it'll be an 1/8 inch plus a 64th. Additionally, this part of the stop block is tall enough so that when I cut the notch, if I have to flip this over, either orientation with this side up or this side up, I will still have contact against that stop so that the piece doesn't slip past this edge by the 1/8 of an inch cut. So I'll make my end cuts now and then lay out the setup. Well, I'm back. This is how it laid out. So the spaces between the dividers side to side will be 1 and 13/16. Front to back, they'll be 1 and 5/8. I'm going to try to show this so you get an idea of how the layout works. Everything's symmetrical so that when I make a cut aligning one end against the stop, I can flip it and I should cut the others. And it'll be 1, 2, 3 setups of the stop. It flipped back and forth to get these notches cut, and then just 2 to cut these, although some are on the top, some are on the bottom. I'm going to do that, show a couple of the setups, and then process all the other dividers and get set up to cut after the dividers are made, we cut a 1/4 inch dado groove on the perimeter ones in the center for the ribbon handle. These are the short pieces that go front to back on the tray at the ends that need to be cut for the dado for the ribbon handles. So I've set the fence so it's perfectly centered, and I have a 1/4 inch dado stack in the cutter. So that groove is where the ribbon goes, and it gets glued in with Titebond free. This is how I lay out the notches after I cut the end notches. I have a divider set at 1 13/16. I have a divider set at 1/8 inch, the width of the kerf of the table saw blade. The notches are going to be cut on the bottom edge. So I bring the divider up as close as I can get, and I make a pencil mark, and I make a pencil mark at this end. It's going to be a little awkward, and it may not line up perfectly. One of the hard parts that are just tricky is that this first layout, it's hard to get the center of the point on that edge, and if there's a discrepancy between them, that's usually where the problem is that I didn't somehow get that where I should. And then it's kind of obvious. I just keep marking down. And then the question is, when you get to the center, is the center space equal to the others? And if it isn't, you just adjust the big divider and do it over until it works. It's not particularly challenging. It's just patience. But the closer you get it, the better off it looks. And also, there are times when the spaces aren't symmetrical. So on this setup, there are 3 cuts. You set the block on the fence 3 different times, and then you flip it end for end like you saw me do before. Sometimes there's 1 extra cut, and when you do that, it's only registered usually off one end. So I put a pencil mark on that end so that when you do the assembly, they all align the way they were cut. And then you can see now that I did this ahead of time, of course, this lines up really, really well. It's only, less than a 64th out. And so now it's just a matter of making pencil lines on the masking tape. And these are where I'll line up these cuts with the blade and make those cuts. The dividers that go front to back, the short ones, are done just the same, but because there's only two cuts, there's only one setup of the block on the fence. So those are the cuts. The table saw blade, this is just over an inch, about an inch and a 1/16, a little bit more. So I'll set this at 9/16 so that there's just a 30-second space between the cut of this and the cut of the other ones, so that you don't have a frustrating time lining things up. Then I'm going to reposition here. And now it's just a matter of setting the stop, making the cut. And this is it. You can see the cuts are pretty close to the pencil lines. And that's it. You just march down and do those cuts. I'll make the rest of the cuts off camera, and then I'll show you the assembly. So here's the finished tray from the earlier batch. We'll put that away. Here's the new tray from this new batch. We have, pulling them apart, the long dividers, the two end dividers, and the 8 interior dividers, or 6 interior dividers. The way I start out is turning these upside down and getting one thing set, one intersection, and then it's just going down, doing these. At this point, I can fit the dividers into the tray. I do that by standing the tray up, tipping this up into it. And the more vertical it is, like this way by having just the ends of the short dividers, then it makes it easier to slide in. If they're more angled, then they bind more. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. I'm going to set it down, push that into place. Then the last of the long dividers go in, and it's best to start at one end and just slide them one at a time, especially if something's a little bit flexing. Now, when the final assembly is done, the end dividers have dots of glue put on because they hold everything else in place. If a customer wants to change the dividers, all I have to do is heat up a putty knife with a plumber's torch, and I separate the end dividers with the hot putty knife to separate the glue, and it all comes out. It's important to do this because when I sell these boxes wholesale and they're in a craft gallery or an independent jewelry store, somebody, if something can come loose, somebody's going to pull it out. And the store employees or the shoppers, they're not really good at fitting things back together. And so the owners would tell me that we don't want the dividers to be adjustable. And that's important, so that you do something that can be changed if they want to make a custom order to change the dividers, but that they're not going to fall out or get loose in shipping and stuff like that without going through a lot of complex glue up, that you can just hold it in place with a couple dots of glue. And that's the way that I do the dividers. And that's it. I'm going to wrap up real quick just by dropping my logo on there for a second and saying thank you for watching.